Good morning, folks. Happy Monday. Thank you so much for coming out on a chilly day. Good to see everyone. My name is Heather Miller. I'm one of the program coordinators here at the La Crosse Public Library. Again, thank you for coming out. It is a very chilly day, so we have plenty of hot coffee for you in the back of the room. Please help yourself. And then afterwards, our friends in the library are hosting a book sale. Feel free to peruse. We've got lots of wonderful books for you to choose from. Well, without any further ado, I would love to give a warm morning welcome to Marcy West, who is the author of this wonderful book, which you can check out from your local library, or she has available for purchase as well. So please give her a warm welcome as we'll be discussing how the Kickapoo Valley Reserve came to be.
Oh, thank you. Good morning. So nice to see so many people and friends and characters from the book are here today that you'll get to meet. My name is Marcy West. I served as the executive director for the Kickapoo Valley Reserve for 24 years. And I went from the Kickapoo Valley Reserve to the Wisconsin Economic Development Corporation for a little over a year. So had 25 years of public service in. And now I tell my husband I'm semi-retired, and when he asks me what I'm doing for the day, I say whatever I want. Right, everybody? Okay. How many of you have been to the reserve? I need to know where to start. Oh, awesome. Awesome. Okay. Big fans, or you'd rather see it gone? Okay. Always an easy crowd. Always an easy crowd. So just a little bit about my writing process, because it is called a book talk. This actually started in 2018 before I left the reserve. The University of Wisconsin Institute for Environmental Studies out of UW-Madison, Paul Robbins, if you know the dean, he came out on a tour with a bunch of enthusiastic graduate students. It was a tour I've done 1,000 times before. And when we got back, he said, "You have to write this down." And I said, "I don't think I do." Because the visitor center tells the story. But he said, "No, this is important Wisconsin history, so you have to write it down." So the board of directors were very supportive and said, "Yes, you can write during your work as long as you get the rest of your work done." So 2018, I started taking writing classes and getting my thoughts together. And then there were a few things that delayed it. The pandemic was a big impact. I went through a job change and then some serious writer's block. Everything you read about writer's block is true. And the start of the book went through multiple reiterations. And I had some very thoughtful editors that were very straight with me. So if you write, if you journal, if you have a book in you, which everybody does, I highly recommend getting good editors that are straight with you and they will tell you, "Nope, this doesn't work," or "This does work." So a learning experience all the way through. In 2023, I applied for the Newsom Fund grant. It's a Kickapoo reforestation grant through the UW Foundation at Madison. And that was met with a match grant from the Friends of the Kickapoo Valley Reserve, which allowed me to pay for publishing. And as we said, it's an important part of Wisconsin history, but the Wisconsin Historical Society does a very limited number of publications per year. And so it would have dragged it out a lot longer. And so we went with Little Creek Press, publishing out of Mineral Point instead. If you haven't heard from them, it's a wonderful business that's out of Little Mineral Point. The number of books that they've put out is just incredible, and they're great to work with. And then it was published last September. So it's available, it's out there, but let's get to the good part. I should have mentioned, I grew up in Green Bay. I'm the 9th of 9 children. You learn to speak up in a big family. So some of the things that made the book special and made it easy to work with Little Creek Press. If you know our chairman, Ron Johnson, he was chairman for over 20 years of the Kickapoo Valley Reserve. He's an excellent artist, but he's not a real fan of writing. So he did some special illustrations for me on the book, and that was great. made it personal. And then former colleague Ben Johnston did a map that, please don't use it for your trail map. This is specific just for the places that I reference on the reserve. Ben did a special map, so want to give them credit and really appreciate being able to make it unique.
You think that you could speak up or have
She's getting some more batteries, but I can speak up. I'm hoping I'm not blasting the poor folks in the front. Okay, so if there is anybody who hasn't been there, is that better? Okay. The Kickapoo Valley Reserve is 8,600 acres. It's along the Kickapoo River in Vernon County. Unique to the Driftless area in that the Kickapoo River starts and stops within the Driftless area. So it starts north of Wilton, Wisconsin, and it empties into the lower Wisconsin on down to the Mississippi, etc. But the Kickapoo River itself is the heart of the reserve, so to speak. Between Lafarge and Ontario, it borders Wildcat Mountain State Park. So the story starts way back, and full disclosure, I do not spend a lot of time in the book on the demise of the dam. So spoiler alert, there is not a dam on the Kickapoo River at Lafarge. Okay, so that's kind of jumping ahead, but it was proposed way back as far back as 1930. The Kickapoo River experiences incredible flooding. Flash flooding, very similar to what you see here in the La Crosse neighborhood. And so folks had petitioned early on to have a dam built, and the Corps of Engineers, so the COE stands for Corps of Engineers, started studying it, really gained some momentum. And then of course, World War II, the Vietnam War, all kinds of things with Congress brought most of those projects to a halt. Restarted in 1962, again, the Corps of Engineers was in that mode of building dams throughout the country. So this one was proposed, and then it got expanded to include a reservoir. So a lake, Lafarge Lake and Dam. I wasn't born yet, but I was born in 1966 when the Packers won the Super Bowl. In Green Bay. Thank you, Jay. So that kind of puts it into perspective of why I didn't spend a lot of time on the prehistory. And then 1967, Corps of Engineers expands the proposal, again, looking towards economic development and trying to help an area of the state that was really challenged as far as farming, economic development, things like that. So this was the proposal. This is an artist's rendition with the surface water, the concrete tower, 110-foot concrete tower still exists. They did get built that far. They got part of the berm built, and they purchased over 149 properties. So this is where it got very difficult as far as writing goes to talk about what the influences were on the determination of whether there would be a dam or lake built. So the Environmental Protection Act passed, requiring the environmental impact statement, the EIS, environmental impact statement. Right about the time we had our first Earth Day, and lawsuits started. So there was a really big interest in protecting the property. Folks had gotten to know the property because of the river. Canoeing the river is fabulous. And there were a number of studies done that showed there were endangered species present. There was incredible bird, flora and fauna diversity is just fabulous there. So there's other people in the room that can talk more expertly about what was happening in the early 70s politically, but they did start purchasing those 149 properties. And again, mixed reviews. Some people were happy to have a buyer. some people were very upset that they had to sell their land. Some of it was taken via eminent domain. And so of course you can imagine the conflict that was building. So with the discussion, I guess is an easy way to put it, of whether it should be continued or should be abandoned. They bought some time by contracting with the UW-Madison, and a study revealed that there were potential problems, that the lake probably would have been very shallow, very stagnant in the summer. There wasn't a lot of effort put into what was happening upstream with discharge and soil runoff. And of course, in the steep valleys, erosion is a major problem. So that study, in addition to the lawsuits and the timing and the politics of it all, brought it to a halt, brought construction to a halt. So they stopped building the berm. A highway, portion of the highway got reconstructed, and all of those properties had been purchased. Most of them had been demolished or moved off. But all this time, floods continue. So again, the flooding issue raised its head in 1978. You know, the Kickapoo's normally 3 to 5 feet high, and 1978 crest of 14 feet 9. And then other ones have beat that, unfortunately, since then. So ongoing studies of a smaller option, but basically everything had stopped. It pretty much became known as no man's land. Folks, you know, there wasn't a lot of oversight because the Corps of Engineers nearest office is La Crescent, Minnesota. So 8,600 acres roughly, with abandoned buildings or no buildings, and no oversight. So in the early 90s, things really ratcheted up, and this is where it gets exciting for me anyway. The elected officials at the time saw an opportunity to find a solution to this, and a grassroots group of neighbors, basically a mixed group, and former Senator Ruud will tell you a little bit more about that in a minute, but came together to talk about a solution. And some things became obvious of what they wanted to do. Other things took more discussion. So again, we've got this federal legislation going on where the dam and lake were authorized in federal legislation to be built, and a great deal of money had been spent. But the Corps of Engineers had overspent the budget, and nobody wanted to put more federal money into it. And then at the state level, you have Governor Tommy Thompson at the time, Brian Ruud, Steve Gunderson, Dwayne Johnsrud, the mix of elected officials, Senator Feingold, Senator Cole at the federal level as well. All of these discussions going on how to come up with a solution, and accentuated by a 1993 devastating flood. So in 1994, state level legislation created the Kickapoo Reserve Management Board to manage the 8,600 acres. And I was hired in 1996, just after the federal Water Resources Development Act. So I'm sorry for all these acronyms, but it is how our government works. So Water Resources Development Act, or WRDA, included deauthorization of the lake and dam. And that was really pinnacle, because up until that time, former landowners, organizations, environmental groups were continuing the fight back and forth of, okay, we had another flood. Every time it floods, the issue of the dam comes up. Oh, if we'd only had that dam, it would have fixed it or protected us. So the deauthorization was really important to make sure that folks knew it wasn't going to be built. It didn't sit well, but at least it was an answer. And then at that same time, the Ho-Chunk Nation came into the discussion from the federal level as well, obviously as a sovereign nation, and the significance of the archaeological sites on the reserve brought them into the discussion as far as preservation and protection goes. So I spend a lot of time in the book talking about the memorandum of understanding process, how that document developed. And again, it was bipartisan throughout. It's truly a 3-page document that had never been done before, to our knowledge, where a sovereign nation and a state entity are managing a public land together. And we'll get to it in a bit, but the Ho-Chunk Nation has direct involvement through the board and through managing 1,200 acres within the reserve. So all of that happened in the first couple. I was hired in '96. We had to have the memorandum of understanding done by October 30th of 1997. And then again, the Packers win another Super Bowl. It works. It keeps it clear in mind. So we had the official dedication in the spring of 2001. Again, the combination of the Ho-Chunk Nation, elected officials, these federal bureaucrats. Anybody here, I should have asked this before, anybody here retired from the Corps of Engineers? Because I really don't mean to shed negative light on the Corps of Engineers. They were doing the best they could. They had a directive. They were doing what they could, but they were also very happy to be at that transfer celebration and have it off their list. And then again, through a combination of events, the visitor center opened in 2004. So if you haven't been there, I highly recommend going to the visitor center and seeing all the good things going on there. But this is an image from the celebration that day. And again, the combination of former landowners, the Ho-Chunk Nation, it really was a monumental event, and folks hopefully felt a little better about it. So yeah, this is the northern view of the reserve from County Highway F on the border with Wildcat. Just want to illustrate, I mean, again, growing up in Green Bay, Wisconsin, I never knew places like this existed in Wisconsin. The hills and valleys and the size of it, just amazing. And also amazing that people used to farm it and make a living, because some of the areas are really rough. If you've ever been to Black Hawk Rock, the hike of Black Hawk Rock, this was a view from Black Hawk Rock a few years ago when the fires in Canada were giving us those incredible sunsets. But again, Black Hawk Rock is one of those really significant sites for the Ho-Chunk Nation, one of their ceremonial sites. And Bill Quackenbush joined me at the November book talk in Lafarge and talked about the significance of that. So back to the arrangement, we have a state board, the Kickapoo Reserve Management Board. And again, this grassroots group had some things that they agreed with early on. They really wanted it to be managed locally. So if you can imagine all of those discussions about the dam starting, stopping, whether it was going to happen or not, they really felt like the decisions were being made far away, either in Washington or the Corps of Engineers in Vicksburg or St. Paul. So I think, you know, having a majority local board really makes a huge difference. It is their backyard, literally. And then 2 representatives of the Ho-Chunk Nation with cultural expertise. And then 3 direct appointments by the governor, representing the interests of environmental, tourism, and education issues. So this was the board I left, or the year I left. Just a really interesting mix of dedicated citizens, and the commonality is everybody loves the reserve. So now the reserve is used for recreation in all seasons, multi-use. I took the picture obviously from the river, Bridge 13 was restored, a historic bridge restored by the Ho-Chunk Nation. Horseback riders, bikers, and then you've got a kayaker going under it. Same bridge in the winter, and it's great for cross-country skiing when we have real snow. Education programming is outstanding there. This is Bill Quackenbush with a group of students. And again, to be able to get people out of all ages learning about why this project is so important, some of the history, and also the environmental importance is outstanding. So folks often call it a park or a preserve, and it was very intentional to be called a reserve. It's not fenced off. People can get in, use it. It's very functional. There's still agricultural leases. There's still timber harvests, things like that, but it's also very protected. So again, in our own backyard, to know that we have a national natural landmark, that we have archaeological district with national recognition, the 300 registered archaeological sites of significance, everything from petroglyphs to marker trees, and still that history of how the river and tributaries were used for hunting and fishing and gathering. Just incredible that it's all in our backyard again. And then unique habitats only found in the dendritic, lots of tributaries going to one main river. The system is incredible. It's also recognized as an important bird area with global significance. And it has a designation, so within the 8,600 acres, 3,500 acres are designated with the state natural area status for over 400 plant species, 12 rare or endangered. New things are being found all the time. The rusty patch bumblebee, last year some students found a nest and were able to document. So kind of that living laboratory. So this is what it's like to float down the Kickapoo. Those rock walls hold an immense diversity of plant life. Cliff cudweed, former board member Sandy Heidel always wanted to do a cartoon named Cliff Cudweed because we could have used it as an educational piece. But those weeping sandstone outcroppings, if you haven't been on the river, you can see them along the road, but they're better from the river in my opinion. So all of that deserves protection. And a lot of what we went through as from the board's perspective, the Ho-Chunk Nation, the state and staff, was how do we protect it and still let people use it? So we dealt a lot with the protected but impacted issues. The Kickapoo River is famous for canoeing and kayaking, and there are 5 or 6 liveries operating out of Ontario, Wisconsin. They put thousands of canoes and kayaks and now inner tubes that I never thought would make it through rocky terrain, but they do. And so on a Saturday, it's just like a traffic jam on the river. But again, folks are loving it and love the beauty. So we did a lot to make sure that folks cleaned up after themselves. We did a lot of trail reroutes to minimize impacts, and did everything we could to educate. The campsites that are on the reserve are not developed. You have to want to do primitive camping, which I don't know about you, but I don't want to do that anymore. I really like my bed and a shower in the morning. So Wildcat Mountain is strategically placed with a beautiful campground, upgraded, and you can enjoy Wildcat Mountain State Park or one of a number of village campgrounds. But on the reserve itself, it's only primitive. And then, like I said, a lot of cleanup and a lot of education on multi-use. There are some really dangerous situations. This is obviously horseback riders trying to get from the north to the south segment across the famous Rockton Bridge. And it makes life really interesting for both the horse and the driver. But we still do deal with flooding. So the flood of 2018 just blew everything out of the water, literally. There was nobody in that van that's tipped into the edge of the bridge there. Everybody was safe, but that was right at the end of my driveway. And that is usually just a trickle of Warner Creek. And then obviously the old 131 trail, or no, sorry, Highway P trail. So flooding is still an issue. And we learned a lot about building trails and building bridges to let them have the impact and just wait for the water to go down. And thankfully, we didn't lose anybody in that one. But again, the issue with such a huge, beautiful property with such significance is that we also have to plan for it. And right now, the current staff is dealing with invasives. The entire region is dealing with these incredible rainfalls and storm events that we have to be ready for. And then development. I mean, we now have a property adjacent to the reserve that the vacant 5 acres, $15,000 an acre, which I never thought I'd see happen compared to what I paid or what we paid for our land. So, and you know, when you talk to people from Chicago or Milwaukee, $15,000 an acre is nothing. But to us, it's like, whoa, $15,000, and you can't build on this. It's just for their camper, the 5 acres. So they'll deal with development, and then of course that mix of recreationists. And you see it a lot here in La Crosse. I was on the Outdoor Recreation Alliance board for a while, and the trail development and the pressure that's put on the marsh or any of your other public spaces, you folks know that recreationists really like their hobbies, and they will defend them come hell or high water. So it will require some prioritizing. And again, hopefully we've got that base board intact, these 11 people that really love the reserve, qualified staff, and they can do their part to protect it. We have to keep researching, keep learning from it. And then I just wanted to emphasize the collaboration at all levels. All of my years, we had relationships with the local villages, the towns, the county, state, federal, organizations, donors, the Friends group. It all really goes together to manage a very big property. And we know that we can't be all things to all people. So, you know, if you want to think about what the future holds for these pieces of paradise, we talk often about, had the reserve been proposed in this day and age, of whether the elected officials could come together and find a solution, whether the Ho-Chunk Nation would trust us to deal with us, or you know, how that would be written, or whether the dam would have even turned a shovel full of dirt. You just don't know. But as far as the future goes, we can talk about those significant entities within the reserve, the ecosystem, the diversity, the size. For southern Wisconsin, 8,600 acres, and connected to Wildcat with another 3,500 acres is a pretty significant public land. So all of these connected communities will have to talk about what the future of those pieces of paradise are. And obviously, I hope we did all the right things to keep it protected for a long time. So that's pretty much the formal portion. Again, funding was supported through the Friends of the Reserve and the UW College of Ag and Life Sciences. It's published by Little Creek Press. As Heather said, it's available here in the library and online. But every one of these book talks has been very unique of which characters from the book show up. So when we got this one scheduled, it turned out that former Senator Brian Rood was available to join me. And so this is just my picture of bipartisanship, a fond memory, I think it was, of my going away party, where former Senator Jen Schilling and former Senator Rood could smile over a potluck, probably one of the best potlucks. And so, yeah, I just wanted to invite Brian to say a few words because he was in the thick of it. So, Brian?
All right. I didn't write a speech, but so 3 things I would talk about. First is Marcy eloquently talked about the pain in the Kickapoo Valley, and having been an elected official from that area, a third of the Lafarge School District was wiped out by all these farms being acquired, these 50-some farms. 1/3 of the kids in the school, and the business district was devastated by the loss of all these families. And they thought, well, this is okay. We're going to get a lake. We're going to have a lot of recreation. We're going to have tourists. And then, of course, it didn't happen. And so there was this immense pain. And 3 elected officials, Bill Proxmire, Gaylord Nelson, and who were U.S. senators, and Pat Lucey, who was governor, all switched from being supporters of the dam to opponents of the dam, which is largely why it was stopped in Congress eventually. And then they kind of walked away from it. They just didn't want to deal with Lafarge. So that was a level of pain. So I got elected in 1983, and it's like, what do you do for these people? Oh, they were so bitter, so angry. And so we waited a while for that citizens advisory process to come forward. And then we got all kinds of people who said, build the dam or else, and said, you know, it's just not going to happen. What are we going to do next? So that was really critical, I think, to asking the question. And there were 3 things that the Citizens Advisory Committee said. We want it to be owned by the state and have the state pay us taxes. We want it to be locally managed, and we don't want the DNR to run the project. Because they felt the DNR had some role in stopping the project, even though I don't think they had. So that's kind of where we ended up. And the Ho-Chunk came in late in the process, but what a gift they have been to the project. And they have a wonderful working relationship with Vernon County. They pay over $1 million a year to Vernon County for their share of their taxes and supporting law enforcement. So that's been a wonderful thing as the project has worked out. So 1 was the immense pain. 2 was, as Marcy said, it was a unique time bipartisan wise. Whole new set of elected officials worked on solving the problem. U.S. Senator Russ Feingold, Herb Kohl, 2 Democrats, Steve Gunderson, a Republican congressman, Tommy Thompson, Republican governor, 2 Republican legislators, myself and Dwayne Johnsrud. And so none of us had been around officially when the dam was stopped, so we were able to say, let's move forward. And we did it in a really good way. So Kathy Onsiger, who worked for me at the time, spent enormous amount of hours on this project. So that bipartisanship was at a unique time and place. And truly, I mean, we worked really closely together, all of us, to make this happen. And we had to stick together because there were still some people saying, build the dam or else. And so that was an issue for us. So finally, my other comment, and then I'll sit down unless you want to ask me a question, is that Marcy's very modest about her role. The book is wonderful because she was present at the creation and all the way through for what, 20 years? 24 years. 24 years. She came to see me when I was a member of the legislature and said, I'm thinking of taking this job. What do you think? I said, absolutely. You'll love living in Lafarge. But we had to have the right person at the right time, and she was that. She was, she had the right mix of background in the sciences and understanding of the political process, and managed somehow to keep people moving toward that middle of productivity. And she had some pretty scary times along the way. You had some death threats, because some people were opposed to certain things. Maybe it was horse trails, or maybe it was not recognizing where the Star Valley Cemetery was. So Marcy put it all together, and so that's why I think it's a great read, because she was President Creation and made it happen. And it's a great place today, thanks to her efforts. So happy to be here. I love the book. She had me read drafts a couple times, and I could add very little to her work. I love the finished product, so thanks for inviting me today, and be happy if anybody's got a question about politics to take that. Thanks.
I was just gonna say Representative Tara Johnson is here, so we can talk to Tara about how we would love to continue the work of the bipartisanship in this area and in the valley. Any questions or any comments, anything to share?
Is there any data, or does anybody know what impact the dam would have had on flooding had it been built? There must have been studies and studies and studies.
They did. They had some estimates, but there were so many unknowns of what that upstream issue was. You know, just like what we're going through now in the La Crosse and Little La Crosse, West Fork, and what's Coon Valley's? Coon Creek? Coon Creek, where those dams were inundated in 2018. You know, the projections, we never thought we would have gotten 15 inches of rain in less than 24 hours. In 2018, our pocket did. So the studies that they had at the time had those caveats, but they also showed that it could control a 100-year flood under certain circumstances. So depending on where the storm hit, which tributary, and how fast it came in, because that 110-foot tower, they really did consider an engineering marvel. They could control the water level at the deepest part of the lake, but they couldn't necessarily control the amount of soil being eroded coming in. So yeah, it was really interesting. I got to interview Dr. Dennis Keeney, who was a graduate student at the time on that study. And he said they wanted to make it work. They knew the people, they wanted to make it work. Corps of Engineers wanted them to make it work, to say that this is gonna take care of communities downstream, but they just couldn't. It just, given what was coming in as far as soil erosion. And I mean, back in the early 70s, those small communities of Wilton, Norwalk, Kendall, no, not Kendall, Wilton, Norwalk, and Ontario's sewage treatment plants were not necessarily up to the environmental standards that we have today. So all of that was going in, which would make it a very eutrophic lake and shallow. So he emphasized, Dennis Keeney emphasized that as well, is that they couldn't come to that conclusion to say, but 100-year flood, I mean, 100-year flood is, we have a 1% chance of flooding, and we've gotten 100-year floods how many times now in the past, you know, the 2007, 2008 back-to-back floods as well. Wisconsin Dells got a lot of attention because they had the video of the house going into the lake, but you know, just over and over again, people having to be relocated in areas that the dam would not have protected. So, yeah.
Another question, I'm not familiar with Black Hawk Rock. How did that get named? Doesn't make sense to me.
It doesn't make sense. No, and the Ho-Chunk Nation has a different name for it.
Oh, okay.
But it was just local lore that Chief Blackhawk was there, but no,
No.
he didn't
Yeah.
make it that far. Right. Yep. So no, the Ho-Chunk Nation has a different name for it, but it was called that for many years and there were certain fights we didn't want to start. Yes, sir. Black Hawk Rock? Just south of Rockton. So if you do get a visitor's guide or if you look it up online, Black Hawk Rock Trail is marked on the visitor guide. Yep. Yes, sir.
We canoed the Kickapoo a number of times back when it was canoeable. I'm not sure how many years ago that was. What's the status of the Kickapoo for canoeing now?
It's awesome. It's well maintained. Part of the highway reconstruction, because when I started doing the Kickapoo, we would slide down the banks on our butt in the mud and hope beyond hope that you hit the canoe when you got to the bottom. So we identified that it was better to concentrate people and be able to control where they were. So there are access ramps throughout from Ontario down to Lafarge. And yeah, I did Ontario to Lafarge one day. I started at 9 in the morning and I got out in Lafarge at 6 p.m. So it's fabulous. The log jams are cleared by a combination of the shuttle services who want to keep their business, and they mainly operate from Ontario to Wildcat Mountain State Park. But here's a secret. The prettiest part of the river is Rockton to Lafarge. Landing 12 to landing 20 is gorgeous and not as heavily traveled.
Are there primitive campsites along the river that you could camp, canoe camp?
They're not as easily accessible. After the 2008 flood, we had a near miss with campers who didn't realize how fast the river had come up and they needed to be rescued via rope. So we had to move the campsites, the primitive campsites that were along the river out of the floodplain. So there are still 3 that are fabulous on the visitor's guide, but they're a little tougher to get to. That you leave your canoe and trust that it'll still be there in the morning. But yeah, it's great. Talk to me afterwards. I'll mark it for you, which ones are best. Yes, sir.
You keep what, that you want our land back?
Yes. Yep. Many people. And again, it was many of them thought that they were doing the right thing at the time. And my book talk in Baraboo, Al Anderson was a tremendous facilitator for before I got there, of just bringing the board together and getting things rolling. And he talks about it, that the people felt like they had been lied to, that they sold their property for a reason. If it wasn't going to happen, then give the land back. But it would have had to go through public auction because the Corps of Engineers used public funds to purchase it. And that many years later, no guarantee that they were going to get their land back. So I think that really fed part of the animosity as well. And then I mentioned Mary Buffton in the book, just a wonderful woman who had lost so much, but was still just so nice to me when I started and talked about how it felt to see all that land just become overgrown and weeds, as she called them. And so those years from when it stopped, 1975, to when things really got rolling in the early 90s, kind of just let it fester. Brian, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, the landowners, giving it back to the landowners was one of the answers, but they changed. Some of them were dead, families had moved, they'd all been paid a fair amount at one point, and the sense, I think, in the valley was, you know what, we're enjoying this. We're going out there right now, we're hunting out there, we're snowmobiling out there. And so the majority of local people said, we should keep it as an entity. We should keep it together rather than try to sell it back to the owners. There was also a proposal, we should just put it up to the highest bidder. You know, sell it to to the Wisconsin Dells kind of thing. And thank God we didn't go in that direction, but the pain of the landowners, and I started there. If you go to the visitor center, on the wall of the outside of the visitor center are the names of all the 50 families who were. And the last, Bernice Schroeder was the last landowner to support the project in the Citizens Advisory Committee, and she said, you have to promise me every landowner's name will be on that building, and we did it. So, it's still pretty raw for a lot of these families.
And I had never been through a construction project, so that visitor center, we had checked those names over and over and over again. And sure enough, 2 of the bricks came in with misspellings and we didn't catch it until they were already in. We found out how to white out misspelled bricks, but
There
yeah,
you go, but-
yeah. Sorry, yeah.
I have a two-part question. At what point, at what point were the Hoochie Nation involved in this whole process? Did they approach your board? Did you approach them? And then the other piece is, how was the 1,200 acres settled on?
You're just not to that chapter yet in the book. Yeah, so the Ho-Chunk Nation was invited early on before I started, during those facilitated times with Al Anderson. So that would have been early 90s.
92, 93, the land was owned by the Corps. There was some belief that if the Corps made it disposable, the Ho-Chunk would end up with all of it under the some federal act. So fortunately, Cloris Lowe was the tribal chair at the time, and he really recognized that that would not be a good thing for the tribe to end up with the whole thing. But he wanted a presence, and that's, I think, how we ended up where we did. So it really has been an enormously positive partnerip.
Yeah.
So, and I don't know, the question of how they pick the 1,200 acres.
Oh, sorry, yeah, the 1,200 acres is identified in 2 large blocks where there were the most concentrated archaeological sites. Once we got to the point where it was agreed to that the entire thing would be protected, the full 8,600 acres, and even if there's vandalism or anything on the state portion of the land to a cultural site, it's elevated to the same level of punishment as the federal. So that made the tribal members feel better. But yeah, those 1,200 acres are in two blocks where there's ceremonial sites, there's petroglyphs, there's marker trees, there's just a real concentration. But then the understanding that they have input into the board and the overall protection is written in rule and statute. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, Kathy, if you want to chime in as well, but Kathy worked with Senator Rood, but then she also was a board member and would attend our board meetings. So she got to be my boss for a while. Yes.
Were there cemeteries that had to be moved when the land was taken over?
Yeah, when they thought everything was going to be underwater, there were as I understand it, and again, this was before my time. As I understand it, they gave the families the option to move their ancestors to either the Rockton Cemetery or the Star Valley Cemetery. So, but we do have documentation of family burials. And again, we, having it in rule and statute is that you have to do an environmental study before you turn more than 14 inches of soil, and you have to do an archaeological study. So a number of the things, like where the campgrounds are placed, people will tell us, oh, you should put one here. It's got a beautiful view. It's got blah, blah, blah. And we're like, no, we're not going to dig that up. I say it in the book. I don't deal with the spirits that might come and haunt me. Sir?
thing?
Well, ginseng under state law, you have to have a permit. Morel hunting, gathering is allowed as long as it's not for resale. So you can use it for private consumption. It's open to hunting and fishing. Yeah, so there is a visitor's permit that you have for the reserve that is separate from the state park system. Another one of the genius statutory portions is that all the money taken in for the reserve, by the reserve, stays with the reserve. So it doesn't get shared like the state parks do. So, I don't know, how are we doing on time here? Do we have a stop dead at 11? Okay, any other questions or any comments? Anybody want to share what their favorite portion of the reserve is? Those of you. Okay. Yes, they do lease it out to. Not to that detail. There are conservation measures that the leaseholders have to follow. And the Ho-Chunk Nation actually converted the tribal lands that were farmed into organic farming with, as most of you know, Organic Valley headquarters is in Lafarge, Wisconsin. So they worked with Organic Valley to convert some of their fields and then a lot of prairie restoration. But from the reserves perspective, the lease agreement has a conservation plan required with buffer strips and either no-till or minimal till, cover crops, things like that, waterways. Yes, ma'am.
Did any study the introduction of elk or wolves or anything like that?
No, there has not. The question was, has there been any introduction of elk or wolves? No, we have documented migration. Wolves have been documented coming through the reserve. Bear have been documented, but they haven't been released there. The one release that the reserve does have as part of the state system is a pheasant release, and those come out of Poinet as part of the Department of Natural Resources efforts. So that's kind of like a put and take hunting of pheasants because there's not enough grasslands for those kind of birds to make it on their own. Anything else? Well, I just, again, a huge thank you. Thank you, La Crosse, for having me. Been wonderful to work with, and I hope you all get out there in any season of the year because it is a fabulous gem in Wisconsin. Thank you.